The title of my presentation is Operation Matura 2023, and as you can probably guess, I am going to talk about the new Matura, the exam, its requirements, and the most importantly about how to take our learners from 2019 through this entangled net of various changes and new requirements and take them straight onto 2023 to give them a good chance of passing the new exam well. As you probably can guess, judging by the visual I have chosen, it's going to be also about teenage brains and how they react to what's awaiting them in the new exam. I must tell you that I wish that there was one magic tablet that our students can just swallow and as a result learn everything that is necessary for all of the exams. However, we don't have that magic pill, and we teachers have to make quite a lot of effort to make sure our students feel confident and prepared for the exam. So how can we go about this, having those 4 years between now and 2023? It's good that we are going to have more time, 4 or 5 years, depending on the school that you teach, obviously, to prepare students for this ultimate test of their English life, so to speak. Now, I have chosen the metaphor of operation for a reason, and I'll hopefully be able to explain this to you as we go along. First of all, I have a question to everybody listening. Of course, you don't have to answer that question, just think about it. Have you ever had a surgery? A serious one, a minor one, just a surgery? Well, I'm asking because I've had 2 in my life. They were fairly serious. And let me tell you very briefly about the first one and the other one. The first one, I was taken to hospital. This was Friday evening, and the situation was quite urgent. Somebody came and told me that the next morning I should be ready for a procedure. In the meantime, between the time I was told about this procedure and the procedure itself, I had been put through all kinds of various tests, and I didn't know exactly what was going on with me and my body. And this wasn't a pleasant experience at all, simply because I didn't know what was going on. I was not told. The other time I had another surgery. I also went on Friday evening, and I was also told that the procedure would happen on Saturday morning. However, this time, the doctor who came actually explained everything to me in plain Polish, as it were. Then the nurse came and explained all the procedures that were going to take place before that time and the next morning. And I felt so much better simply because I was informed. Yes, I was told about what was going to happen to me and how things are going to work out and what the possible risks are and how I should prepare mentally for what was going to happen to me. The reason I'm talking about something as personal as this is that because it reminds me of how we teachers prepare students towards exams. I believe that most of us actually do take our students through all kinds of procedures and explain things very clearly to our students. And this time I'm going to do exactly the same, because the changes that are awaiting our students are fairly significant. There's a lot of new stuff coming up, and I believe that my students should be told exactly what they are expected to master and what skills they will have to hone and work on towards their final success. We teach through information, through sort of empowering our students to know how to behave in the classroom and how to help themselves and each other before the exam. Now, the time for a change is on our side. As I said, we are going to have more time to teach our students and prepare them for this exam, which is very good. Still, however, in the absence of that magic pill I mentioned beforehand, we need to know how, and in particular what to pay attention to, and what to draw our students' attention to before this final exam. Okay, I want you to think about brain surgeons for a moment, because sometimes actually in the classroom I feel like one. um, uh, Unfortunately, I don't have an implant that I can just embed in my students' brains, and I'm sure this will help them a lot, but that's not an option for us teachers. All we can do is teach well, and as I said before, pay attention to what's necessary. Now, every brain surgeon, before he or she does a job, they consider various aspects. First of all, they have to understand the structure of the problem. Like we teachers have to understand the structure of the new syllabus and the core curriculum. Secondly, good surgeons, like the ones I dealt with the second time round, prepare themselves and the patient for what's happening. And in this case, I treat my students in that way. I want to be prepared myself to know what's going on, but also prepare my students for what's coming. Then I inform my students, like brain surgeons inform their patients, of all the risks and opportunities. So I explain to my students what risks they are going to take if they don't do particular things. And I explain to them, look, guys, I have a prescription for you. I know how to help you succeed in your exam. But all you need to do is basically take this prescription from me, go to the chemist, and buy the medicine and actually take it. Yes, this is your opportunity to do well in the exam. And we know as English teachers that English is becoming increasingly popular as a subject that students choose, also more and more often at the extended level. So they need to be aware of what's happening even more so. Finally, we also have to gather the right instruments. In our case, is the materials that we teach from, ideas that we can use to enhance our teaching and therefore students' knowledge. And also, what we need sometimes, I believe, is kind of a mask to make our lessons more light-hearted. I know that Matura teaching is usually associated with hard work and toiling away and all that, but as teachers we know that without some sense of humor and fun and creativity, teenage brains often simply fall asleep. So in my presentation I want to show you how to become someone like this. Have a look at this gentleman. What is your first association? Think about it. To me, that's how I see what I do in the classroom. Sometimes I am in charge of this operation education, operation English, but at the same time, I want to be like a sort of guardian teacher, guardian surgeon for them, and guide them through the difficulties of the exam requirements, especially now, as you will see in a moment, the changes are fairly important to recognize. So that's who I believe we should be. When you assume this kind of a position in the classroom, you also believe in this. Altitude is determined by attitude, and I'm sure as good teachers, especially of teenagers, you understand how important it is to tell your students that they can actually achieve much more that they think they are capable of. The more we tell them how good they can be, I believe the more they actually strive or aspire to becoming someone better. That's my personal attitude to this altitude. Of course, that's, as I said, very personal, but I think it actually works with teenagers. The more we believe in them, the better it actually becomes. Okay. So let's start examining these changes. I'm sure that by now you are aware of our beautiful booklet, which was compiled by Katarzyna Kotorowicz-Jasińska and Grzegorz Śpiewak. This is full of really just simply reflection on the exam, but also it compares the two co-curricular really, really well and points out certain ways in which we teachers of English should actually work. And that's what we need, this kind of crash course, because as you know, the whole document actually, as found on the side of the Ministry of Education, is rather lengthy. So what we have done here at Macmillan is to offer you like a crash course, the most important things you will find in that brochure. So enjoy it, perhaps not during the summer, but maybe just as you begin the school year, it's worth looking at. Now, what stems from the new core curriculum is that definitely students need the skills that they have had so far. So we need to hone old skills, in a sense, improve on them, work on them. But the skills that the students have got so far are actually still very much welcome and necessary. But at the same time, we have to implant some new skills in our learners because of what's happening in the new exam. So this implant is still there. We need to work on new skills with our learners. Now, our learners are at a particular age, as you know, and sometimes without a certain amount of knowledge on their behavior and their brain, their reactions and motivations, it's very hard to teach this age group. I have found these two books quite inspiring, and I have decided to share this with you. I don't know if anyone has read any of them, but they're both very good, and they both really explain very sort of academically, but also very practically in a sense. It's sort of this combination of both, what the teenage brain is about. There are lots of books on the market, of course, about that. These two are simply my favorites. Again, is my personal choice. And what you learn is what I have implemented in my presentation here. So you will see the results of that reading coming up shortly. I'm sure you have seen this visual before. It's been circulating for quite a while, but it's still very true of teenagers. And believe me, I have a daughter who has just graduated from a high school and a son who is about to turn 12. So it's all very true. It's a particular organ. It is indeed something special that we as teachers must be aware of, and how it works, especially to be able to work with those people. Now, I want you to think about these adjectives. Have a look. This is one of the activities I use with my students as well, very often. These they all begin with D, as you can see, the letter D. And I often write on the board various adjectives I want my students to revise. Sometimes it's also very good for word formation skills. And students simply have to read these adjectives as I reveal them one by one. And if they believe that the adjective is true for them, it describes their personality, for example, they simply raise their hand, or clap their hands, or stamp their feet, or whatever reaction we agree upon. Okay? So in this case, I can't see you, but you can see me. You can clap your hands if you want. Do you think your students are disorganized? I think I can hear a lot of clapping. Are your students distracted? Are your students dead tired at the same time? Do you find them determined? Do you think they are determined? Do you think they are devoid of ambition? And the last one, do you think they are disciplined? I think somewhere along the line, I heard a lot of clapping. Anyway, it's a good way of revising certain adjectives, but it also shows you that teenagers are not just one bunch of people. Most of them feel quite disorganized and distracted, but often it is because they are very, very tired. And at the same time, some of them, most of them in some cases, are fairly determined and disciplined, especially in the last class before the exam is up. And I would not call them devoid of ambition. They simply show sometimes their discontent or their unhappiness with school for a number of reasons, perhaps because their brains are not being tickled in the right way. Anyway, what I find interesting here is this web page. Are you familiar with something called Boom Positive? Boom Positive is a nice website which has a collection of various words, usually adjectives, but also verbs, all grouped together according to one particular letter. And they claim that most of these words are actually very positive words. So sometimes when I look for inspiration and look for words that are grouped according to one letter, I use this web page to help me plan my lessons. Yes. So okay, bearing in mind what I just said, that these students are who they are, it's quite important to very sort of briefly, however, sensibly talk about the patients that you are going to operate on. Perhaps you have seen this wonderful event which was streamed online some time ago. It was a wonderful conversation between Professor Alicja Gałązka and Grzegorz Śpiewak. Have you seen that? Anyone? Because it's worth seeing. If you haven't, you may still, I hope, be able to see it. And in that conversation, Professor Alicja Gałązka, mentioned the following aspects of things that stem from the natural development of a teenager. And she said that teenagers have all of these things here that you can see. They are actually quite creative and imaginative. They can communicate, they can think, etc. However, this is all under construction. This is all in progress. And therefore, sometimes when we want our students to think about something, analyze, synthesize, evaluate, they find it hard because certain parts of their brains have not yet developed. And that's important for us from the point of view of the new curriculum and the demands of the new Matura. Secondly, Professor Gałązka, in her webinar, she mentioned the following skills or competencies that young people will have to possess in order to function well on the market. And please have a look at these. Okay, and I'm sure you agree that that's the case. The hardest, if I asked you now which is the hardest for your students, I think it would be very difficult for you to pick just one of these competencies, perhaps. But when I look at some, like for example this one, wnioskowanie, umiejętności analityczne, when I look at przetwarzanie informacji, when I look at praca w smogu informacyjnym, these three are actually also included in the new Matura. And I'll show you examples of how these competencies are going to be part of the exam. All of them are extremely important, of course, all of these soft skills as well, because this is what makes us human, and actually we learn how to cooperate as a result. But that's not yet in our Matura. Cooperation is not part of it. So how do we do this with their brains not exactly always being switched on? Yes, that's the problem. Sometimes in our lessons, the students are simply not switched on. And our task as teachers is forever trying to find ways in which we can actually switch them on again. Yeah. So that's part of this Operation Matura, how to do this in the time that we are given. Okay, the first step that I want to propose to you is just simply build awareness. There's nothing more necessary for our students and us as teachers than having the awareness of what goes into into the exam. Now, the definition of knowledge is this. Have a look. Knowledge is being able to understand knowledge. So uh, you read something and you understand it, and it is very important, but it is not. And what's the word? It's important, but not. It's not enough. If somebody got the word enough, congratulations. So what is enough? So far, it was enough for the students to read and understand, really, and this was good enough, I thought. Now it's definitely not enough, because what is expected of the learner of the 21st century is the following. I'm sure you're familiar with LOTS and HOTS. These are nice acronyms. LOTS stands for lower order thinking skills, yes, and HOTS stands for higher order thinking skills. And I'm sure you're familiar with these. It's not the first time that somebody is telling you about those skills. And when you are teachers, I can just tell you, look, guys, you have to prepare your students. Please take into account the LOTS and HOTS. And as teachers, practicing professionals, you understand that LOTS is remembering, understanding, and applying, and HOTS is analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And at this point, I could just stop this conversation going on, because teachers understand how these things work. And just you could tell your students, look, I've got this prescription for you. You've got to learn the LOTS and HOTS, and when you learn them, you're going to be fine. Yes. Okay, you want something more specific? Why not? This is more specific. Have a look at HOTS for analyzing. This is a nice breakdown of all the skills you need to learn in order to do well in your Matura. Okay, so you need to learn how to predict, sequence, classify, explain, solve problems, uncover motives, synthesize, make connections. Okay, fine, my class, everybody understands? Of course not, because this may be good enough for us adults, for us teachers, because we've been dealing with this many times in our own lives, in our own education, obviously. But for the students, this is quite fearsome. This is something that they're not going to like and understand in the first place. And if you remember my anecdote about my 2 surgeries, this is what I mean, that by not explaining things to the students, we actually put them in a position where they fear what's going to happen. And those of you who know me and my ways of teaching, I never teach through fear. I try to teach through actually information, through explanation, rather than telling students, look, you should fear your Matura, because I assume that if they are afraid, they will actually study harder. It may work for some students, but for example, it never worked for my daughter. Whenever she was put in a position where she was afraid of her test or exam, she didn't do very well. She just needs confidence, basically, and definitely not fear. Yeah. Okay. Now, I want you now to listen to a little anecdote, and this is the end of this anecdote. And let me explain that to you. Okay. A guy who was afraid that someone is under his bed, and because of this he couldn't sleep, went to see a psychiatrist and asked him for help. This psychiatrist said, okay, no problem, you probably need a few sessions with me. Maybe I should also refer you to a therapist. And this therapist came along and said, yeah, fine, I can help you. I charge $80 or $100 per session. If you come to a few, you should be cured in no time. So the patient left and never went back. Then later on, they met in the supermarket, I mean the therapist and the patient. And the therapist said, oh, how come you never turned up for the sessions? How are you coping? And the guy said, well, I'm coping quite well, actually. A bartender cured me for $10. The therapist was very, very surprised and said, what do you mean the bartender cured you for that just $10? And the guy said, well, he told me to cut the legs off the bed, and I sleep well now. Yeah. So my idea here is for you to understand that I'm not trying to look as a teacher for very complicated ideas to teach students how to do things, but I'm looking for very simple ideas, those $10 ideas rather than $80 ideas, which are simply too complicated and difficult. Okay, now I have a question to you. Have a look. What do teachers do when they want to challenge their students? What do you want to do when you challenge your students? The new exam is about a challenge, although I think it's quite a manageable challenge. Again, students need training and confidence in that challenge. What do the students do, and how do you do this in your classes? Well, let me help you. This is a visual that might lead you to your answer. I know you can see quite a fat tummy or belly. What students should get? They should get a lot of fat questions. Do you know what fat questions are? Fat questions. Does anyone know? Perhaps you've seen this. Perhaps you haven't. So now I'm going to play a short video which I hope explains what fat questions are and why these fat questions are important for us teachers of Matura students. Okay, let's assume it's going to work, and have a look, please. This video lasts about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Okay, I hope you enjoy that film, and I think it does explain really very well the difference between lots and hots, and as a result, skinny and fat questions. And when you think about the new Matura, you will see that it is going to be a combination of lots and hots. Don't worry that the whole exam is going to be structured along hots, because it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a mixture of skills, both lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. Okay, now Skinny and fat questions are not just about things like reading or listening or writing or speaking. They're also about vocabulary. I want you to have a look at the word operate here. This is what I do with my students quite often. My students are familiar with these two terms, skinny and fat questions. Originally, they were quite frightened by the amount of the thinking that they will have to do. But the more you do this, the more they actually get the point. And again, skinny questions. When you think about the word operate, skinny questions are like this. Yes. So, what does it mean? How do we pronounce it? What part of speech it could be? Can you use it in a sentence? These are simple, sort of remember, understand, apply types of questions. Fat questions, on the other hand, are a little different because you have to show more knowledge or think a little more or find answers if you don't have them. And the questions are like this. Does it always mean the same in English as in Polish, this word? Yeah. What can you operate? Again, you have to think of collocations. What parts of speech can you make from it? Yes, word formation. Can you use it in a sentence, each time showing the words different meaning? Of course, this is for extended Matura. But this distinction between skinny and fat questions also works for vocabulary. So I encourage you to, from time to time, find a word which is controversial or harder for the students to use, and try to break it down like this for the students as well. Of course, I wouldn't be myself if I didn't include tasks of this kind in the exam. You know, if you know me, how important, for example, multiple meanings are for me as a teacher. I believe they empower the learner. So the more meanings they know, the better readers and listeners they actually become. So wherever possible in the book, and whenever I was allowed, I tried to smuggle in tasks for example, multiple meanings to help my learners and hopefully your learners as well to have a better understanding of how English works. Now, going back to lots and hots, I would like to think about these beginnings of different questions. These are lower order thinking skills and the typical questions that we use to, for example, understand a particular text. So who, what, where, when, do you know, can you identify name and list? And this is what I do with my students to explain to them the whole concept of lots and hots. I show them these questions, or the beginnings of the questions, and then I show them, for example, this character, Cinderella. Yes, Cinderella. And I ask my students to think, because everybody knows this story usually, think of lots questions, those skinny questions that they could ask their partners in relation to this fairy tale. Yeah. So the students, of course, come up with questions like, who she was, what happened, where it happened, can you identify more characters, etc. Yeah. And I said, this is all fine. It's good to know. These are skinny questions. Yes. So let's move on to hot questions. And now we need to learn how to interpret the text on a more abstract level and manipulate information ideas, this processing, przetwarzanie. So I say, okay, you've made some simple questions here. We answered those questions and they were simple enough. You had to still think and remember the information, no problem. But now I want you to look at the same story again. And I want you to answer the following questions. And other students look at these questions, which I have prepared for them. And this is not, as you can see, a type of skinny questions. This is a clear example of fat questions because it's more about interpretation and manipulation of the information. For example, this one, how do you know Cinderella liked the ball? Yes, you have to draw conclusions based on what you know. How about this one? Again, this is speculation. This one is simply, it is not even part of the story. Yes, you have to think outside of the box, as it were. So this is my way of how I intend to introduce lots and hots to my students through a simple story that they are familiar with, and show them how the difficulty of these questions actually progresses as they go along. Yeah, so that's what I want my students to do based on Cinderella. So this is basically teaching students to be more clinical. Clinical here means more precise, because in the new Matura, questions are going to be like that. What conclusions can you draw from the text that you heard or read? What evidence can you find for this or that in the text? What ideas justify a certain point of view based on what you've read or heard again, yes? So this being more clinical is something that we have to work on with our students as much as possible. Okay, right. That's what when I was now we kind of completing password reset, and when I got my first brief, these were the most important aspects of what my editor told me to focus on in the book. Number one, identifying information. Is it stated or implied? So the students have to decide if a particular information is actually directly or indirectly stated in the text. Identify the author's mood or attitude, not necessarily based on vocabulary, based more on the global understanding of what the text is about. Of course, our favorite fact from opinion differentiation business, where students struggle a lot usually. And also something as exciting as ordering events. I'll show you in a minute what is meant by this ordering of events, because it's quite different. Okay, so in a nutshell, what I suggest you do is find a story that your students simply know and remember from their childhood. It could be a film that is currently trending or something that the students are familiar with. Choose familiar content. And once you choose your familiar content, try to take students from lots and hots and help them come up with skinny and fat questions themselves for their partners or other groups to see how this process works. They need to understand the difference between these questions and see how different they have to think each time. So that's what I suggest may be done in this case. Those of you who work with technology, and I hope there are some, technology is useful if it's used obviously effectively and efficiently in our classrooms. Do you use technology, by the way? If you do, you may be familiar with something called iPedagogy wheel. It's quite useful to me. I found it on the internet, and I keep looking at it sometimes because it's really nicely divides different skills that are connected with lots and hots, as you can see. Shows you what are the actual actions that you take while you practice these skills, activities that are associated with these skills, as you can see, and also gives you possible apps or tools that you can use to practice these skills. And it's actually quite interesting to see, or it would be, what happens in Polish schools, in Polish classes. Which of these are actually used by the students themselves at home, used by teachers. So if anyone is interested, it's very interesting. iPedagogy wheel. I really recommend it for reference. Yeah. Okay, so how to be more clinical with text and more clinical with vocabulary. So just to sum up, we need to hone old skills. So lots are still very much needed because students will still have to remember and learn and understand and apply the knowledge, but also learn how to use HOTS, higher order thinking skills, more efficiently in their Matura. So step one was awareness. All of what I have said so far is to build students' awareness of what's necessary and how the new exam is going to be built. The second idea that I propose is focusing on texts. I think I'm going to focus even more on texts because new Matura is going to be heavily text-based. From listening to reading and use of English as well. So Operation Text 2023. I hope you like working with texts. And my question is, I don't know who is watching me exactly and how old you are, but if you remember the way you were taught English in your schools, because that's how I was taught English. We were given a text like this. This one comes from Checkpoint. Very interesting text about a lesson in friendship. Nice story. Anyway, we were given a text. I remember that, and as we read the text and were trying to understand, sometimes we had to translate word for word. There were different methods used. Anyway, ultimately, we were asked to answer questions. Do you remember learning English like this? Anyone? I bet so. Now, this is how we learned English and how we learned to interpret texts. For many years until now, this kind of an exercise wasn't really that popular in many course books because simply it wasn't necessary. Now, we are told that one of the exam tasks possibly could be answering questions. So we're going back to what we were in the past and how we dealt with learning English. For a simple reason. Questions like this, what, why, when, etc., help you understand the text, but often also interpret what happens in the text. So don't be surprised if your students have to deal with something as basic as this in the exam, where they have to come up with full sentence answers for the given questions based on the text. Yeah, so that's type of task number one. Now, have a look at this, please. This comes from my password reset reading comprehension activity. And as you see, you may want to just to look at these stems here. Which piece of information was stated last here? And which conclusion could you draw from the text? And I want you to carefully consider these two questions. The first one is something new. It wasn't really tested so far, or hasn't been tested so far. For the students to understand which piece was stated first and last, they really have to understand the text and have the ability to paraphrase. I hope you agree, yes, because all of this information is not going to be stated in the same way in the text. It's all based on paraphrase. Number 4, which conclusion could you draw from the text? Again, it's not necessarily stated directly in the text. It's going to sort of hang on the student's understanding of the text. So these are new types of questions that the students will have to deal with. Yeah, so that's pretty hard for them. Have a look at this one. That's my favorite. This is where I got surprised by my editor, because I didn't realize questions could look like this. So this was novelty to me too. In what order do the events of the story happen? Again, students really have to understand the text quite well in order to fairly quickly determine the order of the events in the story. This is, of course, basic level. You can expect harder, more difficult language at the extended Matura. So as you can see, the difficulty here is not about the language itself. It's about cognitive preparation, cognitive confidence that you can deal with tasks like this. Yeah. And it's not only about reading. As you can see, it's also about listening. And with reading, as you know, you can go over the text a number of times. With listening, it's only twice. So students really have to concentrate on what they hear. And again, have a look at the types of questions. For example, which information in the recording has not been stated indirectly? So which of these were stated directly? Basically, yes. So you really have to have a certain understanding of the text in order to determine this answer. Of course, questions of this difficulty are not going to constitute 100% of the Matura. Yes, let's face it. It's probably going to be 20, maybe 25% of the questions. So those HOTS, as we sort of seem to be more and more frightened of them, are not going to be that maybe what's the word? Not that sort of dominating as it were in the exam, because the exam is still lots and HOTS together, and HOTS are probably for students who are more capable to differentiate between students who are more and less capable, like the new exams are meant to be. So that's it. Now, another type of task that you are familiar with by now, I understand, is fact and opinion. Again, this is not easy for students to determine which one is which. I have done this exercise with my students. They listened and had to decide which one was an opinion, which one was a fact. Some of them they got wrong, so I thought, maybe I should direct them to the transcript of that conversation and get them to find the information in the transcript. That wasn't that good either, because a lot of the students actually had still had problems understanding or seeing the difference between fact and opinion. It's easy when there is some phrase at the beginning, like in my opinion. It's obviously an opinion, yes, but these statements don't always have that preceding phrase for the students to determine. So again, they have to go dig deeper into the text. Fact and opinion is hard, not just for students. It's also hard for humans, for people. I found this a piece of research on the internet about adults in the USA. As you can see, people were asked were given 5 statements to determine if they are facts or opinions based on something, and only 5, only, as you can see, 20, oh well, once fourth of the respondents actually managed to get all 5 right. So it's not just the question of the students, it's also adults, us, me and you, who sometimes find it hard to decide what is opinion and what is a fact. At least sometimes when you, I don't know, watch the news or read something, you don't know if this is given to you as a fact or as an opinion. It's not easy. Anyway, what I do with my students, I often give them this particular visual. I find it very useful. It comes from a lovely web page called Comprehension Connection, where you can find lots of nice sort of tips and actually visuals as well to help you teach comprehension. And we go through this and explain again what facts are and what opinions are. And this seems to be very helpful for the students. They also get this piece from me, and they stick it in their notebooks for reference. So every time we read for fact and opinion, they can go back to this and perhaps use it. So definitely what we need to do is to help students sort of see the texts. They read through those fact and opinion glasses. Yeah, so they really need to be switched on and understand the difference. Another thing that we need to do with our learners is teach them something which I think is fairly new, although it's been part of the Polish education. When they study towards the Polish exam, Matura exam, they do that. And what is that? And that, as you can see, is reading between the lines. Reading between the lines is very useful as a skill. There's a nice quotation here. Reading is important. Read between the lines, don't swallow everything. That's important for us citizens and people in general. If I have any men in my audience, then also please remember that a happily married man is one who understands every word that his wife didn't say. And it's also very important for our learners to read through the text and understand what the author didn't say explicitly. Yes, and that's, I think, is going to be a new skill to transfer what they know in Polish or should know in Polish into what they actually need to know in English. Yes, so that's part of our job. As you will see, there's quite a lot of Polish in this exam as well. Sort of in a sense, it's a welcome change, because we do work between Polish and English all the time. But sometimes I feel that as teachers of English, we also have to become teachers of Polish. Anyway, this is a possible task in the Matura for reading between the lines. Have a look. Which information is stated directly and which is stated indirectly. Yeah, that really takes some time and some brain to figure out what it is. So it has to be practiced regularly. That's what I'm saying. That you need to find books that have these kinds of tasks in them, because otherwise your students will not be able to function well in the exam. Yeah. Okay. Have a look at this, please. And can we together determine which questions are fat questions and which are skinny questions, or thin questions, sometimes we call them as well. Which ones are which? Yes, have a look. This is a listening conversation between 2 people, young people. Which of these are fat questions and which are skinny questions? Okay, as you can probably see, it will all depend on actually what's said in the recording. But look at the first question is definitely a fat question, because you have to say what evidence, yes, what gives you this impression. So you listen and you have to answer the question, what gives you this impression. Number two depends on what's said in the text, could be fat or slim question. Why does mom advise her against going to the film school? Again, depends on what's said, could be both, yes, if it's stated directly or indirectly. Number four is an example of a skinny question, because it's simply what advantages does someone mention? So something will be mentioned, you listen, you copy, you're done, yes. Again, number five, it will depend on the context, how explicitly or implicitly the information has been stated. So this is the kind of difficulty that the students may have to deal with in the exam. So the thing is how to help them switch on and figure out how to deal with these tasks. Okay, Operation Matura now takes me to Operation Paraphrase 2023. So far we talked about awareness. Let me remind you, we talked about textual incision, so how to work with text and new types of tasks. And now let's move on quickly to the paraphrase aspect of it. Paraphrase is omnipresent, you know it, you've been working with paraphrasing probably all your life. The whole system of how exams are structured is all about paraphrasing. So in a sense, what you're going to do is again honing old skills that students already should have, and at the same time implanting new skills to help them spot the right kind of information and to paraphrase things well. Now, what I do with my students very often is this: I show them a simple text. This could be done as a warm up. It takes really 1 minute, 2 minutes at the beginning of the lesson, where you show them a simple text like this one, and you ask them to paraphrase the words in color. So in this case, it's famous, delicious, children and adults loved to eat it. Yes, you can obviously get them to paraphrase just single words. The better they get at English, paraphrase fragments of the sentences. And this forces them, in a sense, to come up with new words, as they will have to in the exam where they read, yes, and will have to spot the paraphrase of the right comprehension question. So in this case, I showed them the answer. Of course, they had their own ideas, etc. So basically short text, simple text, and get them to paraphrase as often as possible. Sometimes with these paraphrases, you will need cosmetic surgery. So the paraphrase is not going to be too difficult for you to handle. But sometimes in the exam, you will see that the paraphrase is more difficult for the learner to get, and it becomes more of a sort of plastic surgery, really, in terms of how you treat the language. Yes. So what I do with my students to prepare them for this, remember, preparation, information, explanation, not fear, are the key to what we do in the classroom. I give students statements in Polish to begin with, and I want them, first of all, to go for this cosmetic surgery, lower levels, and I want them to read these sentences, lubię moją pracę, and in pairs, I want them to paraphrase just one word to begin with. So instead of lubię, kocham. Instead of moją pracę, to co lubię. Yes, because paraphrase works obviously not just sort of one word system. Or a sentence. Bardzo się cieszę, że matura się zmienia co kilka lat. Okay, bardzo się cieszę, że egzamin dojrzałości zmienia się co kilka lat. And I get them to paraphrase this in pairs, one word at a time. The higher we go, and the more confident my students become with this activity, I want them to replace all of the words in the sentence. And sometimes these are really funny expressions they come up with. Sometimes, it's also part of sort of this, fun in the class that happens because students are so creative with their ideas. But this work on paraphrasing is actually absolutely crucial. So again, we have to be more clinical with texts, go deeper, and more clinical with vocabulary, more analysis, more paraphrasing, helping students figure out how language works. Another activity that I often use with my students is based on word formation, and word formation is crucial for us in this exam. Have a look at these sentences. They've got some words in blue. And as you probably can guess, I want my students to come up with derivatives of these words. So in this case, you must work hard to succeed. They will come up with success and successful and unsuccessful, of course. What can I do to improve? So it's going to be improving, improvements, possibly impressive, impression, impress, etc. Yes, graduate, postgraduate, undergraduate, graduation, etc. So they write these words, and once they've come up with as many words as they could, I can help them produce some more. I get my students to actually come up with sentences using the new words, yes. So you must work hard to be successful. You must work hard to achieve success. And you will see in a moment why this word formation is so important from the point of view of the new Matura. Well, it is important for that reason. Have a look. This is part of the sort of step-by-step unit in password reset. And in those units, as you probably know, we really take students through the whole process and pain of what it takes to do a task like this. And you realize as a teacher very soon that what the students have to do is they have to listen to someone talking about something, and they have to come up with answers to complete the gaps. Sometimes these gaps are as simple as sort of, what you hear, you put in, and that's fine. But again, the more advanced the level, the more the students are actually asked to paraphrase. And a lot of these paraphrases are simply word formation options. So you hear the word successful, and you have to, for example, make success, yes, or the other way around. So word formation is crucial, in my opinion, and it really should start from class 1 to be more safe, on the safe side. So I propose activities of this kind where I ask my students to go through a number of exercises, again, to make them aware of how this works in English. Yeah. So I support young people in their self-development. The paraphrase is Natalie supports. Yeah. So that's a simple sort of cosmetic surgery. In this case, I advise teenagers, their parents and teachers, Natalie Richardson, two teenagers, yes, two teenagers. This says gives advice, yes. It's less cosmetic, more plastic surgery, because you have to create a new phrase. So prepare students for this kind of treatment of the language to help them complete these potential summaries in the exam. Yeah, so it's quite important to get students to think about the language in this way. Again, one of the tasks I like is this one, where students have to listen to a summary and complete the text, the gaps here, with these words. Okay, but again, these words are not the words that the students hear in the recording. These are already paraphrases of the words that they can hear. Yeah, so prepare your students for this kind of a thinking about English and the language as such. And this takes me again back to Professor Alicja Gałązka's talk about these competencies, because you have a lot of information that you have to process. Yes, this przetwarzanie informacji i praca w smogu informacyjnym, because if you have two different texts, for example, you have to listen to and read and then process and complete one summary, be it in Polish or in English. This is a lot of information together that you have to handle and understand how to deal with. Now, the information you might have to process is not only textual. Please have a look at this one. It's not exactly just text, is it? It's also visual interpretation of some information. And a possible task in Matura is for the students to interpret graphs, pie charts, tables, all kinds of visual information, and then use this information to complete a summary. For example, in this case, notes. Yes, this is a great exercise from Checkpoint. So prepare your students, be clinical with that, and show them exactly what it takes to do well in the exam. Have a look at this, please, here, because these two texts are in English. There are generally three texts, but I just included two in English, all kind of related to mental health. So there is some kind of theme that these texts have in common. And the task for the students is to complete, again, a conversation between two friends based on the text that they have read. How much thinking is this? How much HOTS, yes, higher order thinking skills, does this involve? So you have to prepare students for this multiple processing of various tasks. Now this may happen in English, or it may happen in Polish. Have a look at this task. Again, it's a conversation between two young people. And as you hear, you have to complete this conversation in English. Yes, that's something we have already been through. But you may also be asked to complete the summary of a conversation or summary of the text you've just read in our native language, in Polish. Yeah, so be prepared for this. And again, these gaps are not always sort of one-to-one. You can, extract it from the text. Yes, it's often about really paraphrasing and making sure words fit in grammatically and lexically into the gap. Yeah, so it's quite important. It could also be easily another conversation that you have to complete. Yeah, the gaps here based on what you've read or what you have listened. So please be aware of that. Now, this takes me to a point here about how we read these days, and I'm sure that you are aware of the fact that we as human beings become skimmers. So basically we read very quickly, often without paying attention to the actual content of what we read. Sometimes we read, and as we read we forget what we've just read. Technology apparently is to blame for this state of affairs. As and it's not just teenagers, it's everybody. The way we read is not what we used to read. The concentration is different, focus is completely different. As a result, you may see less attention. We don't like long texts. We read faster, but not necessarily more carefully, and it affects all kinds of things in our life. Critical thinking, for example, empathy that we can't read out anymore from the text. All things that are going to be actually very necessary for the new exam. So in a sense, my thing is that we have to come out of this sort of blindness, because I think it's a very blind spot where we got, and start reteaching literacy and teaching students again how to interpret, understand texts, and do that. Yes, so please bear this in mind when you start teaching in September again, that literacy, reteaching the whole process of reading with understanding is going to be again quite important. Yeah. Now, there's one very important rule in neuroscience, and this rule is use it or lose it. So basically, if we don't read with our students and we are not clinical enough with what we do and text and everything, we are going to simply lose that skill. And I think our students have, to a large extent, already lost that skill of careful reading. And the new Matura, in a sense, is against that trend. The questions, the way it's going to be phrased and what's expected of the learner definitely goes against the grain, so to speak. Yes, so we have to start with teaching literacy again. So again, implanting new skills and is crucial, as well as honing new skills. As you hopefully have seen by now, this exam is about both lots and HOTS, and I believe that what we definitely need is operation thinking. And I appreciate it as a teacher myself. I have always been very fond of teaching thinking skills in the class, however difficult it is, and it's often a struggle to do that. But I think that's what has to happen. Now, to go back and to sort of finish off, I want you to think about yourselves as this guardian, surgeon, teacher person, and remember that the role of the teacher with the new Matura coming up is, number one, to raise the awareness of types of questions and types of skills required of the learner. Okay, to show to the learners that you have the prescription for them, because you have the right materials, you know about lots and halts, and you have ideas for teaching those lots and halts. What the students need to do is basically take the prescription from you, go to the chemist, buy the prescription, and take the pills, the medicine, yes, that you offer, your advice and your tips on how to take the new Matura. I believe that if you take your students through this, your students will be able to at least cope with most of these new types of tasks that the new exam is going to require. Students often need some kind of a sort of, I call it brain lotion. Yes, brain lotion is where the students need to be given some tips, understanding of how things work, some kind of you may say suggestions on how to deal with certain tasks in English. Okay, so that's quite important. Now, this brain lotion is connected with also creativity, because creativity, apart from being creative, also helps you deal with tasks which are connected with HOTS. Yes, the more creative you are as a thinker or doer, the better you deal with actually HOTS in the end. And I always encourage students to think in a creative way. For example, when it comes to pictures, okay? You may ask your students, just to look at the pictures and describe them and tell you what they see. What I force my students, yes, I use the word force my students, to do is to look at these different images and, for example, tell me what they see these pictures have in common. Yes, that's not so easy, because what you can see in the picture is lots lower order thinking skills. What these have in common, yes, it's a hot question, because it goes beyond the basic understanding of what you can see. And again, if I do this just once, it doesn't help, but the more I put students through a task like this, the better. Where possible in my books, I ask students questions of this kind. Yes, look at the cover of the book and its title. For example, what kind of a story is it? What could the story be about? Again, this is hot, this is not lot, because it's about speculating, predicting, being creative with your language. I often ask the students to look at photographs, for example, and tell them to imagine that these people, there are 6 of them, they talk about a party. What is each of them saying? Okay, thank you. Now, imagine these people are talking about the exams. What is each of them saying? Now, imagine they're talking about a scandal at the uni. What is each of them saying? They are talking about their teachers. What is each of them saying? Yes, to change the perspective, to be creative, to think about the language, to paraphrase, to move on like that. Sometimes I give them funny pictures like this one. Yes, I mean, it's not maybe funny, but unusual in a sense. And the question is, what is the dog thinking about? Yeah, so what is the dog thinking about current situation? What is the dog thinking about sausages? What is the dog thinking about his master, etc.? The weather. Yes, again, simple question. Photograph, enough for the students to start thinking in more creative ways. I show them pictures like this. It's a very simple photograph, something you may see in the exam as well. Yes, speaking exam in Matura. And again, I can tell my students, look, these are lots questions, simple questions. Yes, what can you name in the picture? What's happening in the picture? What caption would you write for that picture? This is lots, basic things that you can deal with. However, we need to practice HOTS. So these are the questions for HOTS. Yes, where do you think they are? What might they be thinking or talking about? Are they likely to make up? Why not, for example? Yeah, so sometimes teachers ask me if I actually tell my students that this is knowledge comprehension application, and in the second case that it is analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Yes, I do tell them that, because I want them to be aware of what they're actually doing and how well they are performing in these HOTS. aspects. So that's my choice. I leave that to you if you like this meta language or not. So creativity, honestly, is something that we need to foster to help students deal with more difficult aspects of Matura. So never teach through fear. It doesn't help, at least in most cases. We need the explanation, awareness, and lots and lots and lots of practice, which we as teachers can easily guarantee our learners. Remember the prescription. They need to try and listen to you, take the tips, and hopefully in 4 years' time feel a sense of success. And what we also need as teachers, of course, is a little optimism, that despite all the difficulties that we have had to face recently, especially you guys, I think optimism might might save us somehow. And I hope some of this advice was useful to you. If you have any questions, of course, you may want to contact me or write comments under the when you've watched the film, of course, the clip. And stay in touch, yes, because it's quite important that we do stay in touch and help each other out. Okay, thank you very much, guys. This is Operation Matura 2023. Marta Rosińska here. See you soon, and hopefully hear from you as well. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Goodbye.